Hi everyone, Crista Cowan here with another episode of The Barefoot Genealogist. Today we are talking about genealogical standards. Now, there are a lot of industry standards in family history that cover a lot of different topics, but today we're going to talk specifically about those standards around names, dates, and places and how they're entered into your family tree. We'll talk a little bit about why those standards are important and why you might want to follow them, and then we'll cover the standards one at a time. So let's go ahead and dive in. First, let's talk about why you might want to follow the standards. A lot of times when I talk about standards, people say, well, it's my tree, I'm going to do it however I want to do it. And that is true, it is your tree, you can do it however you want. However, there are some reasons why you might want to follow the genealogical standards. The first is just for consistency and uniformity within your tree. Over time, as you look at different records, as you attach different things, as you create new sources, as your skills develop, it would be easier to have followed the standards from the beginning than to have to go back after you've been doing this for 2 or 3 years and update all of that information. So if you just start off doing it right, then great. Now, if you have been doing this for a long time, don't feel overwhelmed. I still have some inconsistencies in my tree that I inherited as I collected the family genealogy from different people in my family. And I just, every once in a while, go in and spend some time cleaning up some of those inconsistencies. But doing it right from the beginning, for those of you who are just getting started, is a huge bonus. Another reason for the genealogical standards is for clarity of meaning. And this is particularly important for all 3 of the standards we're going to talk about today. When we talk about naming standards, it needs to be clear what you mean by that name, and you'll understand that a little bit more in just a minute. Dates can be unspecific if we don't follow the standard, or they might mean one thing in one part of the world and something else somewhere else. Places, sometimes places, you can have a town with the same name in multiple counties, or counties of the same name in multiple states. Again, clarity of meaning is what we're after, so that we can make sure that we're climbing our own family tree, not somebody else's. Another really important benefit to you for following the standards is that it gives you full and accurate use of automated systems. If your tree is online at Ancestry or in Family Tree Maker, or if you're using any software program, the consistency in following the standards is what these programs were designed to recognize. And so if you're following those standards, you'll have full use, for example, of the mapping features. Life Story in the new Ancestry has a map. And if you've been consistent about following the genealogical standard for places, those maps are more likely to be accurate. Same thing in Family Tree Maker. We've got mapping features. Consistency will improve the accuracy of those mapping features. For those of you who've taken the Ancestry DNA test, and currently that's more than 850,000 of you, those connections that are made through Ancestry DNA rely really heavily on computer algorithms. And those computer algorithms work best when you have followed the standards in the way that you've entered the names, the dates, and the places in your tree. So we want to connect you with other users. Your DNA says you're related to these people, and we want to provide you with tools that help you figure out exactly how you're related to these people. But if you've entered your names, dates, and places in inconsistent or unstandard ways, our computer systems can't always recognize what exactly it is that you meant by that, nor can we match you up with some of those other users who might have similar surnames, similar locations in their trees. There are a lot of other reasons to follow the standards. Those are just 3 that I thought of that might help you understand a little bit better why you would want to follow the standards. So let's talk about what they are. Let's start with names. There are several standards around names. The first one is that you only list actual names in the name fields in your software program or in your online tree. Some examples of some things I have seen that are not standard. For example, if someone has a title, such as Reverend or Doctor, they were not born with that title. That title is not officially a part of their name. There is actually a title fact that can be added in both Family Tree Maker and in your online tree at Ancestry, where you can put in the name, put in the fact of they were bestowed this title of Reverend or Doctor or Sir or Duke or whatever it might be. And you can even attach that to a specific date. when they obtained that degree or reached that occupation or were given that title. So only list actual names in name fields. Titles are one of the things that I see sometimes that don't belong there. Other things that sometimes I see in name fields that don't belong there are random characters. Now I know, again, it's your tree, you can do what you want, but just recognize that if you put in characters for any reason into that field to denote whatever it is that it means to you, that first of all won't be recognized by other people and may even cause some problems with the hinting and searching features that are automated in the Ancestry system. So don't enter characters into that field. Characters are things like asterisks, question marks, quotation marks, whatever, okay? Another part of the naming standards are that we always list women by their maiden name in family history, and that is pretty much an absolute. Always list women by their maiden name. Do not list them by their married name. Now, people say, oh, well, then how do I know that she belongs with this person? Well, she belongs with this person because you've connected them as a married couple in your tree. And anytime you bring up her name in almost any software or online tree system, it's going to show that she's connected to this individual as her husband. In Ancestry, our online tree hinting and searching system is smart enough to look at both her name and the surname of her husband when providing those hints and doing those searches. And so you're going to get both. You do not have to put both into her name field. Now, some people might say, well, but, I'd have a million excuses, and I've heard them all. But what if somebody was married 3 or 4 times? Which names are you going to put in there? We just end up with lack of clarity and some confusion. Another circumstance where this is really important is when people actually marry somebody with the same last name. You end up with a lack of clarity if you've been using married names in that maiden name field when that really is her maiden name. So consistency in this is really important. The question then always arises, well, what if we don't know the name? Well, if a name is unknown, and this is true for a woman's maiden name, just as it's true for a given name. So for example, in my tree, I happen to know my 3rd great-grandfather is George Cowan. I also know that he has a brother named James, but I do not know the name of either of their parents. But I wanted to connect them as siblings, so I created a father, and that father has no first name, and his last name is listed as Cowan because that's the last name. And so he shows up here in my tree, you can see, as blank Cowan, and he is the father of George and George's brother, James. So I don't know a first name in this case. Here in the example of Mary, this great-grandmother of mine, I don't know her maiden name. And so I have left that blank. I haven't put wife of Thomas because I can see clearly she's the wife of Thomas here, right? So I just leave that blank. That is the genealogical standard. There is actually 2 options for you. Leave it blank or enter 5 underscores. I prefer the 5 underscores simply because then anytime I print a report, rather than just a blank space of varying length depending on how the report was written, I get a really clean blank line that lets me know that there's missing information in that case. Again, one of the arguments we get is, well, I don't know where she fits, or if I'm looking at a list of people in my tree, I don't understand, who she belongs to. Well, you'll see here if I scroll up to the top of this list of all people in my tree, I've got a group of women here who do not have spouses listed. I can click on, or who do not have last names listed, I can click on any one of them and it shows me the spouse immediately. So even, if I've got a bunch of Anns or a bunch of Amy's or a bunch of whatever the case may be, clicking on any one of them will show me their other relationships. I don't have to fill in a last name just because there's a field to do that. Finally, if you want to enter additional names or nicknames, there are fields for that. Ancestry, both in our online tree system and in Family Tree Maker, provides an also known as fact and a nickname fact. So if you want to enter those nicknames, enter them as a nickname fact. If this person became the Duke of something or other later in life, you can enter that as an also known as. Or in the way that I prefer to do it, I just use the notes field on each person to capture that information so that I have it attached to that person. Let's talk about dates. Dates are really simple. There is a standard for dates in genealogy, and that standard is the 2-character day, the 3-character alpha character month, and the 4-digit year. That's the way we write it. That's the way the computers recognize it. And there are reasons why we do it this way. Here in the United States, I might say that somebody was born on, 7/6/47. Well, here in the US, that means July 6th. And there's some ambiguity about whether that's 1947 or 1847. Okay? In Europe, that date is June 7th, not July 6th. They read dates differently. So again, for uniformity, for consistency, for clarity, I want to make sure that I spell out exactly what I mean by those dates. I also want to make sure I always include the 4-character or 4-digit year so that my hints are accurate, so that my searching is accurate. All of that, as I'm using these automated systems, is going to make sure that I'm getting accurate information returned. Now, there are some abbreviations that we can use in genealogy for dates, and I would encourage you to do so. A lot of times it's better to estimate a date than to leave a date field blank for a lot of reasons. One of those reasons is, again, it'll provide you with better hints, better searching, better use of those automated systems. Another reason is, for the reason we just discussed about names, if I've got 40 Anns and I don't have last names for them, if I can estimate approximate birth dates, that helps me to start to tell them apart. Birth dates can be estimated off of a lot of things. We all know that census records list a year for the age. They do not list a specific birth date. And so from the census, oftentimes what we're doing is we're estimating an approximate year. So I might put in that somebody who was 30 in the 1930 census was born about 1900. As I collect additional information, that will then hopefully be narrowed down to a more specific or exact date, but that allows me to use my tree as a working tree so that it can continue to research, and it allows me to take full advantage of those hinting and searching automated features. Before and after are really specific dates that I use in pretty specific circumstances. So for example, if someone wrote a will on a specific date and then that will was proved on a specific date, I know that they died sometime between those two dates. And so I might put that they died before and then the date of the will being proved, or that they died after and the date of the will being written. I could also talk about putting in dates for other people mentioned in the will. For example, if he mentions a spouse or if he mentions siblings in a will, I know that they were living at the time that that will was written. And so I could narrow their lifespan down by saying they died after such and such a date. So I use those. I don't use them extensively before and after. About is the one that I use probably more than others. But again, getting used to using that with that standard abbreviation is going to allow those automated tools to work for you a little bit better. It's okay to make those estimations. When you make those estimations, however, make sure you make notes to yourself. If you're anything like me, you spend lots of time doing family history research. It's really difficult to remember everything. So I've found that I make notes about everything. And on Ancestry, you will find that you have a notes field for every person in your tree. The easiest way to find it is just to come up here to Tools, and you have this View Notes button. Pops out a little side panel here, and you can enter information about why you've chosen a specific date. You'll notice here my George Cowan, his birth date is estimated as about 1780. And then I've got notes about the records that I've found that list information about his age and why I've chosen that particular estimation. So make those notes so that when you come back to it or when you find new evidence that you can corroborate that with the evidence you've already found. Finally, let's talk about places. Places are a little bit tricky. Here in the United States, we have some basic standards, and those standards actually all follow the same rule, but we'll use an example here. For most locations in the United States, I'm going to put in city, county, state, and country. The only thing I'm going to abbreviate in that case is going to be the country. I usually abbreviate that to USA, but I'm always going to spell out the names of the city, the county, and especially the state. Again, because I want my mapping features to work correctly. I want to be able to associate similar locations with each other. In Family Tree Maker, I have an entire places section that groups people together based on specific locations. And so it allows me not just to utilize the mapping features here in Family Tree Maker, but it allows me, for example, to see everybody in my tree that ever was associated with a specific location. Maybe I want to see everyone in my tree that ever was affiliated in any way, born, married, died, lived there during a census, with Los Angeles County, California. And so I can come in here to my database, I can pull up Los Angeles, and it will tell me that I've got 675 people in my database affiliated with Los Angeles County. That's really useful for doing research in cemeteries, in local archives, to be able to understand that. It's also interesting at a family level to start to understand how different branches of my family may have lived in the same places at the same time, even though they might not have actually been related to each other for another generation or 2 or 10. And so there's some really interesting analysis that can be done if I've been consistent about entering those locations. So consistency for those purposes is great. Another reason why you're going to want to spell out particularly those state names is because abbreviations meant different things at different times. Now, the abbreviation of IN is a postal code here in the United States for the state of Indiana. But historically, the state of Indiana actually used the abbreviation of IA, which now is for the state of Iowa. And so, again, throughout time, things have changed. So spelling it out removes the ambiguity. CA here in the United States means California, but it is also the country code for Canada. So automated systems might not recognize some of that ambiguity. Spell out those names wherever possible. Now, I'm going to give you a couple of standards, but there's also some differing opinions, and so I'll share those differing opinions with you. The important thing here is to be consistent in how you do it. So the way that I do things is that I use current place names in the location field, and I do that specifically so that I can take full advantage of the mapping technology and the cluster technology of putting families together in the same place. I do record the historical location as well. I put it in the description field so that I can see, it is this place, this is where it is on a map, this is what it's called today, but it was historically, this town was in this county or in this entirely different state. One of the examples that I often use is my family in West Virginia. They live in the little panhandle, that little sliver of West Virginia between Ohio and Pennsylvania, and they lived there for years. They had 13 children all born there, and they lived in, I think, 3 different states and 4 different counties because the boundaries kept changing around them. And so I have in that location field for all of those children listed the current location today, which is the state of West Virginia. However, in the description field, I have listed, that at one time that it was the state of Virginia, and that it was this county at the time this child was born, and this county at the time this child was born. And that's important because then I know where to go to look for records. Because records sometimes stay with the county or the state that it was at the time the event occurred. And so I need to know where to be able to go. So I want to record both of those pieces of information, but I want to take full advantage of the technology. So that is the standard that I've chosen to follow, which is I use current place names in the location field. I put the historic place name in the description field so that I've got a record of both of those pieces of information. Other people choose to do it the opposite way, and that is fine. Again, the important thing here is just that however you choose to do it, be consistent so that there's no ambiguity in your own mind or the minds of your family members as they come look at your tree or those that inherit your work after you about what you did. And the final standard here as it relates to places is we're not going to include detailed place names in that location field. Those are going to belong in a description field or in your notes. So if you've got a specific address or the name of a hospital where somebody died or the cemetery where they're buried, that's great. You want to capture that information, but the location field is not always the best place for that if you want to use the automated tools available. So I use the description field and or the notes field. In Family Tree Maker, we make it really easy, which I love to do this. I can come in here to any piece of information and I can actually bump it up into the description field with just the click of a button so that I can then standardize to a consistent place name. without including that detailed information. So again, lots of standards here, lots of ways you can do things. For those of you who are just getting into family history, you're probably going to want to just review these, make sure that you're being consistent so that a year or two from now, you don't have to go back and redo a bunch of things. And there's a lot of automated things happening in the world of genealogy, and who knows what the technology is going to be doing tomorrow. And if we've been consistent with the standards, we're more likely to more quickly be able to take advantage of some of those technological advancements. Well, that is all I have prepared for you today. I do just want to remind you it is the end of the month, so if you have suggestions for topics for upcoming events or shows, please feel free to email me at ask@ancestry.com and check our Facebook page. That events tab will have all of the updated topics for the month of July. Until next time, this is Crista Cowan. Have fun climbing your family tree.